Hello, everybody, and welcome to the long-awaited return of the National Herald Discussions. I am your host still, Eraklis Diamataris. First off, before we begin with our amazing guests here with Aram Hamparian and Endy Zemenides, Aram and Endy are my first guests in a year, and there's a reason for that. I had a sustained absence due to falling ill with the COVID-19 virus in December of 2020, and we wanted to give you the best possible show that we could. Everything is all straightened out. I really want to thank everybody for their well wishes throughout that time, and so I just wanted to say thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for maintaining your trust in the National Herald, and I can't think of two better guests to get the series underway again than Aram and with Endy. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guests here. We're going to be talking about Turkey, F-16s, the East Med regional stability, and how in a volatile world, none of this seems to be new to the region where we're from, namely Greece, Cyprus, Turkey, and Armenia. So without further ado, Endy Zemenides, you all know Endy. He's the executive director over at the Hellenic American Leadership Council, and Aram Hamparian is the executive director of the Armenian National Committee of America. So we are so excited to be able to talk to two people on different sides of, or I guess the same side of the coin, if you will. We have a common problem here in the neighborhood, and so I want to just jump right in. So ANCA, the Armenian National Committee of America, and HALC, the Hellenic American Leadership Council, they were able to round up a bipartisan group of 50 representatives in Washington and put pressure on the United States Departments of State and Departments of Defense. So I guess we can start with Aram. What was the hope in trying to get these F-16s stopped from getting to Erdogan? What was the main objective? Was it only that, or was it to send a message?
I think there's some of both, but let me just start by saying I'm glad that you're healthy. That's the number one thing. Number two, I'm a huge fan of the National Herald. Number three, it's great to be on with Endy. We may be two organizations in the most technical sense, but we're one family, and he's on my speed dial, I'm on his speed dial. We talk multiple times a day on so many things, but including the F-16s. And the F-16s was a material effort to literally stop a reckless sale that would put very, very serious armaments in the hands of the Turkish government. But it seems like we already have a lot of traction on the issue. A lot of the legislative pieces are in place such that this deal may never go through. And in fact, I think I think we got 53 signatures. They're like 53 nails in the coffin of the F-16 deal. And I think that should hold them down, I think. So it's part of, I think, a broader effort on our part, our collective part, plus many other coalition partners that we have by our sides that seek to constrain Turkey. Turkey is becoming an increasingly reckless and violent actor in the region. We saw that in 2020 against the Armenians. But there's a broad-based effort in the U.S. It's not just Greeks and Armenians, but many others who want to constrain Turkey, perhaps steer Turkey in a better direction at some point in the future. But for now, we need to put a leash on that nation.
Thank you, Aram. We are very big fans of what you do with your organization. And you're right. Everybody's working towards the same goal, which is regional stability. Endy, just to kind of piggyback off what Aram just said a little bit, is it fair to say that actions from this side of the Atlantic and other organizations around the world in terms of dealing with Turkey are feeling a little bit more of a sense of urgency? Is there a feeling that Turkey is a little more erratic these days than it has been?
Yeah, and Eraklis, welcome back. Glad to have this going again. You're an important voice, especially as we come out of COVID. Yeah, there is a sense of urgency, and in terms of establishing clarity when it comes to messaging in Turkey, with Turkey. Even, a few years ago, along with ANCA, echoing our one family, we kind of move in lockstep. We started the anti-F-35, the No Jets for Turkey campaign, and people mocked it, actually. But it worked because we sensed this shift in the perception of Turkey and the reliability of Turkey. But let's remember, that took until the last minute. That was in play. That was until Congress forced the issue, because while I have to give Secretary Pompeo and the Trump administration a lot of credit for eventually putting CATSA on, the F-35 issue was brought to a head by Congress, a bipartisan team in Congress. And by the way, so was the CATSA issue. The administration resisted till Congress put an NDAA amendment that would have stripped waiver authority. And right before that amendment was to pass, the administration imposed sanctions. We worry when it comes to the F-16s and some other items like drones, for example. There is still some mixed signaling that there are people in America who still give Turkey the expectation that the F-35 controversy, the S-400, was a one-off. It happened to be a political hot button issue at that time, but we can get over that. And at the same time, there are some, I think, well-intentioned individuals who are trying to think beyond Erdogan years, not realizing that they can't take for granted that what comes after Erdogan is going to be better. So this mixed signaling is causing unjust expectations. To be fair to Ankara too, if somebody in the administration, if somebody in America is telling you, hey, why don't you just ask us for upgraded F-16 since you're not getting F-35, you're going to ask for that. So the Turkish ambassador is out there telling people that somebody in the administration suggested this. I'm not sure I'm going to take him at his word for that. There's no question that everybody on Erdogan's team lies. But if that is true, that's a bad mixed signal. Now, we can get back into more detail about the administration's response. I'm sure that's one of your questions. But there is a sense of urgency, especially if we're going to have a long-term plan on U.S.-Turkey relations, a plan that extends beyond Erdogan, in creating clear signaling and clear expectations of what kind of ally Turkey should be.
If I could just add to what Endy said, sometimes the Greek and Armenian lobbies, sometimes we're given too much credit, sometimes we're given too little credit. If you read the Turkish press, the Greek and Armenian lobbies control U.S. policy. It's not exactly true, but we have influenced U.S. policy in a very, very meaningful way. And this really deserves a little bit of attention. For a long time, Turkey was granted a veto over certain U.S. policies, and then other U.S. policies were outsourced to Ankara. So don't talk about the Kurds, don't talk about Cyprus, don't talk about the Armenians. And then when it came to the Eastern Med or other, like the Kurdish issue, those were just outsourced. And we just said, okay, you decide the policy, we'll implement it for you. And I think our work, essentially over the last nearly decade, right, and this is where I think we deserve a lot of credit, is we pulled the Turkish hands off that policy. We broke that grip. And that was like a really heavy lift, a very heavy lift, such that and I think Congress did a lot of work here, but Congress did it because there was a civil society push behind it. And today, I'll say it this way, the Turkish grip is not entirely off of the steering wheel of U.S. policy, but it's now the exception, not the rule. So the rule today is don't give Turkey a free pass. Don't just give them a blank check. Let's deal with them as a country on a transactional basis. They will look at how they act, we'll measure how we respond, and it becomes a transactional, realistic world. So that doesn't mean that every decision will go our way, but it does mean that every decision will not go against us. And that's the way it was for decades. During my lifetime, my father's lifetime, that was it, right? They got their way, period, end of sentence, and the Armenians and Greeks and Kurds and others could, yell and scream what we wanted. That era is over, and that's a good thing. Now, in this new realm in which there's no free pass for Turkey, we can fight for our positions, and we can make the case, why does the F-16s are a bad decision, and people who think that it's good to put F-16s in Erdogan's arsenal, well, they can make their argument, right? I haven't seen them do it yet, but I think if we are out in the sunshine, in the light of day, if U.S. policy can be decided by the American people through their representatives in Congress, that's a very healthy thing. And I think the HALC, ANCA contributed mightily to that, to bringing us into a space in which U.S.-Turkey issues can be discussed, addressed, decided on a rational, responsible basis. And I think that's something that we can all, that's a real contribution we made, not just to Armenia and Greece and Cyprus, but also to U.S. policy. I think we're a better foreign policy. We have better foreign policies as a result of our efforts.
Right. I mean, I think what you both just described kind of sounds alien nowadays, given the political climate in Washington, D.C. You're talking about bipartisan cooperation to advance American interests and to actually stick by our word with our allies and not leave them twisting in the wind. Obviously, with the United States withdrawing from Syria and leaving Kurdish forces behind, among other instances internationally, our reputation did take a huge blow, especially in the previous administration. And not to say that there haven't been serious blunders by this one. However, it is very encouraging that, and obviously that didn't happen organically, as you said. Very few times do lawmakers do something organically and in the flow of things rather than being pressured to do it. But it's very encouraging, I'm sure, for our readers who haven't followed these issues very closely to hear that behind the scenes there is a united front. And I guess I just want to on that topic, I want to ask both of you, what, speaking to somebody who may be going to see this discussion that we're having here today, why is it, as succinctly as you can put it, why has it been a Turkish stranglehold on this issue in Washington for so long? And you mentioned that you were able to break the grip. Why was the grip there in the first place, and why was it there for so long?
Well, it was established at a time when geostrategic interests really overlapped, right? During the Cold War, nobody could deny Turkey's strategic importance in great power politics. Then when the USSR disappeared, even during the kind of friendly relations that the West had with Russia during the Yeltsin years, or semi-friendly, that was a legacy relationship developed. And Turkey took advantage of it. Turkey just played the game better than almost anybody. If you looked at their investments at universities, if you looked at their investments in think tanks, if you look at who they were hiring or actually purchasing, and Aram can tell you about the former Speaker of the House, who arguably was, paying hush money for his child molestation with money that he was getting from Turkey. They just played the game, and at the same time, and Armenia is a little different situation than Greece, right? And I'll let Aram talk about that. But Greece did not have the reputation of a solid ally. Cyprus was not an ally at all. In fact, until the Anastasiadis government, Cyprus was officially a non-aligned movement member, right? It was only the Anastasiadis government that brought Cyprus out of the non-aligned movement and actually committed to trying to join Partnership for Peace, which Turkey has subsequently vetoed. And as I told somebody, it's like you're playing basketball. I don't think Turkey was exceptional. They just played the game better than we did. But they were putting 5 players on the court, and we were maybe putting 3 and a couple guys, who were partying at the Bouzouka the night before. Kind of reminded me of the Greek national team in the 1994 World Cup. But then, and even to give ourselves a little bit of critique, this close cooperation that even we're witnessing right here today, we always, the Greek American community and the Armenians, always had an affinity towards each other, showed up at everybody's conferences, same with the pro-Israel community, but it wasn't the daily contact that we have now. It wasn't a real coordinated, well thought of, we're circulating drafts to each other. It wasn't our people going on the Hill together, going in district offices together, building alliances. Aram makes a friend with another coalition partner. I make a friend with another coalition partner. We sit down together. And this is, the No Jets for Turkey campaign is the greatest example of it. Everybody, the Turks try to lambast it by saying, well, here's the Armenians and here's the Greeks. They just hate Turkey. In fact, TRT World did a whole campaign and they ignored our other coalition partners so they could just focus on ANCA and HALC and say, well, Greeks and Armenians automatically hate Turkey. They also say that about the Kurds, but then they can't explain why In Defense of Christians is involved. They can't explain why the Hindu American Foundation is involved. They can't explain why the American Jewish Committee sent a letter across Capitol Hill opposing this measure. And of course, there's more. There's human rights groups that are talking about that. So I think the fact that we have gotten our act together and we have put together a coalition of partners that have the same interests and the same values, that's what's breaking the stranglehold.
I can offer, I'll go back even farther than the Cold War and say that if the West's policy toward the Ottoman Empire in its latter years was, the sort of manipulating or kind of picking on the sick man of Europe, under the Republican government, under Ataturk, they kind of came to a new deal. And the deal was something like, you leave the past in the past. You don't, interfere in our domestic affairs, our minorities. And in return, we'll become a regional ally for you. And that lasted essentially from the mid-20s up until the Erdogan era, when Erdogan decided that he no longer felt obliged to keep his part of the deal. He still wanted and expected the West to keep its deal. The past is the past. Don't mess with my minorities. That's my domain. I can abuse them as much as I want. So he walked away from his part of the deal, expected the West to keep its part of the deal. The West, slow to wake up to that. It took like 10, 15 years to realize they're not the Turkey that they once were. The deal no longer holds, right? That's reflected in now a U.S. policy on the Kurds that's not derivative of Turkish policy, a U.S. policy on the Armenian genocide that is not guided by Ankara, a U.S. policy on the Eastern Mediterranean and Cyprus that's not dictated by Erdogan. And I think that it's basically the U.S. waking up to a reality, being slowly becoming as clear-eyed today as Turkey might have been 10 or 15 years ago. Turkey's tried to fill that gap, right? That creates a gap, right, where they don't get everything they want, and they try to fill that with bribes or just very, very expensive lobbying firms, and then just sort of bullying. When the persuasion doesn't work or the soft stuff doesn't work, they start coming down and using threats and that type of language. And I think that doesn't sit well either. And that creates the environment in which organizations like ours can actually get quite a bit of traction. And this is, and I don't think we would have this traction today had it not been for the 5, 10, 20, 50 years of advocacy that our communities undertook. We, I think, frame the issues well. I think in DC, most folks, even 40, 50 years ago, would say, yeah, the Greeks and the Armenians are on the right side of this issue, and then all the geopolitics. But now it's like, yeah, the Armenians and the Greeks are on the right side of this issue, and Turkey's a rogue. So we can now move in the right direction, and we can do, I think, we're in an environment in which Turkey doesn't run the table, and I think that's a healthy place to be. And then within that environment, you move things in the right direction. Doesn't mean the battles are over. In some ways, it means actual battles have begun. And I think our track record is pretty strong. I think whether it's the drones or the jets or frigates or other battles.
I want to say something about the frigates, actually, because that shows how, even though we've been fighting the same fight, how the context is different. In 2012, we teamed up with ANCA, and we helped on the last day of that Congress block the naval frigates to Turkey. In fact, they tried to sneak it in, a year when then President Obama and then Majority Leader Eric Cantor agreed on nothing. They agreed to transfer frigates to Turkey. And we mobilized. There were tens of thousands of phone calls and emails. And there was a floor fight when they tried to do it just by, consensus vote. And in the end, it was just a couple senators. In fact, my home senator, who used to be the head of the Armenia caucus, Mark Kirk, just put a hold on it, and it died. Now it's, even though if it came down to it again today, I'm sure Senator Menendez would do the same thing. I don't think he's going to have to. It
wouldn't get that far.
It wouldn't get that far. And if we go back to the F-35 ejection, let's remember, it was 4 members. It was 4 members of the Senate. It was Jeanne Shaheen, Chris Van Hollen, Tom Tillis, and Senator Langford from Oklahoma that pressed that legislation. Let's remember, it was not only Senator Menendez, but then Chairman Risch, Chairman Inhofe, and Ranking Member Reid in the last Congress that wrote a New York Times article saying Turkey can have the S-400s or the F-35s, but not both. So, and as we found out at the end of the Trump administration, the chairman and the ranking members of both the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee maintain a hold on all weapons sales to Turkey. And as we have been talking with Congress, they maintain that hold. So the fact is, it is a different ballgame, and it is really a time to press the case for true accountability and full accountability for Turkey.
Great points raised by both of you. I guess again, this could be to both of you. Does routinely and recently more effectively blocking arms sales from the United States to Turkey make Turkey and Erdogan specifically that much more desperate to seek other avenues, less predictable avenues to try to advance their goals? Whereas one could argue, yes, they shouldn't have these weapon systems at all because they are going to behave erratically no matter what, but at least we have some semblance of control because they're ours as Americans. Some people might argue that. And I guess the second part of that question is, does the Turkish economy being on the decline in the pits, and it's doesn't seem to be getting that much better, and it might not get better for a while, does that make Turkey more dangerous?
Well, I would say in terms of sort of the sourcing of Turkish weapons, we spent the Cold War sourcing Turkey's weapons for them, and I don't think it constrained them at all. I think that it's an attractive idea, and I understand why it's held, and it's held by many bright folks in the city. But I think they're off. I don't think Turkey. I think Turkey's is operating at a significantly higher level of sophistication than, oh geez, we're grateful to these guys, therefore we'll do, or reliant. They'll find other ways, and I think that we had that experiment. It lasted 60, 70 years. But
are they operating under the premise falsely that they can actually somehow rein in Erdogan, and they don't quite understand him?
That's been well, let me say this, and I've discussed this. There's a whole range of folks in our foreign policy establishment. Those are they're the cheerleaders who you could put anybody in charge of Turkey. They're going to cheerlead Turkey. And there are those who are the post-Turkey people, and then there are the people who are no, Turkey's a lost cause. And he can fine tune that much better than I can. But there are still folks, deep in our government who go to bat for Turkey and are always trying to turn the Rubik's Cube in a way that'll show them that here's why we should back Ankara. And it seems like that group is highly insulated from the facts, because it seems like they're unable to sort of get their head around the idea that no, Turkey's hostile, and for the time being and for the foreseeable future, Erdogan's going to take them in a way that's inimical to U.S. interests. But we just need to deal with that. But if we find ourselves in a situation where we're always chasing Turkey, always trying to appease Turkey, it'll work against us. Turkey I think, is exceptionally good at that game. They've played the game for decades of you need me, and then and they've drawn all these red lines. All the two red lines that stand out to me the most were like two things that we were told: you can't upset Turkey. Can't upset Turkey by talking about the Armenian genocide, and President Biden talked about the Armenian genocide. The world did not end. And then we were told you have to do all your diplomacy with Turkey quietly. It needs to be done through quiet diplomacy. And that President Trump proved that wrong when he publicly threatened to impose sanctions over the illegal imprisonment of Pastor Brunson, a Presbyterian minister who had spent years in Turkish jails. So President Trump, laid down the law, and Pastor Brunson came home. So I think, of course, there are bright people on all sides of this issue, but I think, believe very deeply that that setting reasonable expectations, drawing red lines, imposing consequences is the way to deal with Turkey. Give them, just the carrots and carrots and carrots approach is one that Turkey manipulates very well, but doesn't really get us where we want to go.
So part of the problem, to build off of what Aram said, is that diplomacy, and then again, this is going to be, I'm trying to be generous even to the cheerleader crowd. Diplomacy is often more of an art than it is a science, and like in many forms of art, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and the beholder just has it off. The Turkey policy, I still believe, is subject to a lot of this legacy relationship. Some people have gotten over it. Some people are just amazingly intellectually honest. I tell people I'm a big fan of Stephen Cook, especially, and Michael Rubin's intellectual honesty on Turkey. They say they'll get out there and they openly discuss that they used to think Turkey was, great, and they even talk about how they thought that there was hope in Erdogan, 20 years ago, and then they'll say we got it wrong. There are other people who will say, no, it was the fault of the Armenians for messing up the Armenian protocols, or it was the fault of the Greeks and Cypriots from keeping Erdogan from getting into the EU, or it was the fault of the Greek Cypriots for saying no to the Annan plan, or it was the fault of Sarkozy for freezing EU negotiations. So, the fact is that Washington needs to get a little more intellectually honest about, we got it wrong. We bet, just like we bet on Orban, and they got Orban wrong. But they are operating under a false premise, because Turkey is also, this is the one thing that nobody's even discussing in some of these sales. Turkey is not seeking a permanent relationship, a long-term relationship. The F-35s were a bridge to them, as are the F-16s, a bridge to them to create their own domestically produced fighter jet. And they're really upset about the F-35 because F-35s are supposed to be a platform. The S-400s were bought by Turkey, not because the United States would not sell them Patriots. They would.
Can you just tell our listeners what the S-400s are in the event that they don't?
So the S-400s are the Russian missile defense. It's Russia's version of our Patriot missile defense system. And it's the reason that Turkey got sanctioned, because they did a major transaction with Russia that invoked the requirements of CATSA, which is a Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. They were told to back off. They didn't. They were given options. They didn't take them. But among those options is, you can buy Patriots, we'll sell them to you as an ally, but we won't give you a technology transfer. We won't give you co-production. We're not going to share that technology and those secrets with you. We'll give you the weapons. And Turkey wants to be completely independent. And by the way, that's their right. If they want to be completely independent, fine. But they can't do it on the back of the American taxpayers. They can't do it on the back of American national security. And they are in the defense industry kind of they've taken the position that China does in terms of corporate espionage. You can come and do business with China. We're going to steal all your technology. And then we're going to come out with a Jeep that looks exactly like the Jeep Grand Cherokee. Oh my God, how did we do that? That's what Turkey was trying to do. People got wise to it, and they're out.
Yeah. Again, just to touch on touch again on what I shared earlier, there's civil society, American civil society, groups like ours way out front. I think we kind of got it pretty early. Maybe we got it even before anyone else. And then you have the Congress, which is figuring it out, and I think in a pretty safe space. And then you have the executive branch, and you have a range of opinion in the executive branch. At the far end of the executive branch, at the far end, you have people who are auditioning for the next job working for some Turkish lobby or Turkish government. So like that, let's just count those guys out. They're bought and paid for. But right next to them is another group, which I can only describe as like, how do I say this? As a spouse with a serial cheating partner who they blame themselves, they blame everyone else. It's my fault. It's not his fault. It's not her fault. And just like, it's almost comical and sad. It's like pathetic. It's really a dysfunction that we have here. And maybe it's just the result of spending 20, 30, 40 years inside the system and kind of like having, a groupthink that develops, but they're really having a hard time waking up to the spouse, next to them in that bed. They're not loyal. They're not friendly. They don't have their best interests in mind. And I think that's kind of like, I think we're at a point where that becomes less and less tenable a position to hold within even the Defense Department or State Department, maybe less than with the Defense Department. Still in the State Department, you still have characters like that. And I'm shocked to meet them. It's like, finding kind of an endangered species. Our hope is that they go extinct.
Aram, I think what you're touching on is the fact that some people are pining for a world that no longer exists.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's over.
You see people doing that with COVID now, and they don't. We're 2 years into this, and most people just seemingly either can't or unwilling to comprehend the fact that there is no going back to normal. There's going forward to a new normal, but the things that you encountered before, that's done and dusted, and we're building something new here. Yeah, and I think that
we're the ones with the 2x4 in the trash can, waking them up, saying, "Wake up."
Yes, exactly. So I guess in terms of, we talked about frigates, we talked about the S-400, we talked about the F-16s. What would you say, and Greece just put in a pretty substantial order to upgrade their Air Force, and they're looking at other defense options. Because at the end of the day, you can talk and you can have dialogue and strategic dialogue, but at the end of the day, if something happens, you need the equipment in place to defend your homeland. And I guess in that kind of scope, I guess, Endy, we can start with you here. What is the current, for those who aren't following this as closely as the people in this discussion are, what is the current balance of power in the Eastern Med?
Well, Turkey, because it's a bigger country, has, if we're talking about just bilaterally, Turkey, because it is a bigger country, has more forces. Right? There's no question about it. But if you look at the balance, because Turkey has also, let's remember the team that's running American foreign policy now, they came in effectively, most of them in 2009 under the Obama administration, and they were celebrating a Turkey that had a declared zero problems with neighbors foreign policy. This Turkey has zero neighbors without which it has problems. So while Turkey may indeed have a bigger a bigger army and more resources in terms of soldiers, planes, and all the rest, they also have a more spread out armed forces. They're involved in an active war zone in Artsakh. They're bullying Armenia. They're enforcing a no-fly zone and an embargo on Armenia. They're involved in Syria. They're involved in Libya. They don't have necessarily a friendly border with Iraq, even though they get along with the Kurdistan regional government there. They have problems there too. Their problems in the Eastern Mediterranean are not only with Greece and Cyprus, but with Egypt and Israel. And then if you take Greece's force structure, which is entirely, not entirely, but almost entirely structured to protect against the Turkish threat, that gives Greece probably a qualitative or a quantitative, puts Greece quantitatively on par. Qualitatively, I think Greece is ahead of them because Turkey purged its armed forces, especially its air force, because of the coup. There are reports of subpar piloting. Greece's air force is highly ranked. Greece constantly trains in the Aegean. Its navy, as we saw that during the crisis last year, its navy outperforms Turkey in the Aegean. And then when you get into the Eastern Mediterranean, depending on what shape a conflict may take, you have Egypt, Israel, you have other force multipliers, and more importantly, you have France now. People forget that was one of the biggies in the French frigate deal. There was a security guarantee by France, and France constantly, even again during the problems last year, showed up in the Aegean, showed up in Cyprus, is talking about doing a naval base in Cyprus. So Turkey's advantages are mitigated by a lot of factors in the region we're talking about. And of course, Greece now has a higher level of fighters with the delivery of the first Rafales. Greece's F-16s will certainly be upgraded before Turkey's F-16s. So not only is Greece quantitatively on par,
also thanks to you guys and your work,
qualitatively it'll be better. Turkey.
Endy, you just described a hypothetical. Thank goodness. We were just talking about in hypotheticals. Aram, unfortunately, can talk about something that is not hypothetical at all. It's every single day. Thankfully, the folks in Ukraine currently, obviously, we had the Crimea situation already happen a few years ago. But thankfully, as of this recording, everything that we're talking about is hypothetical over there. We just talked about, what could happen and things like that. Aram, can you talk about a little bit of what is actually going on right now between Armenia, Turkey, and the mess? Artsakh was brought up. What does, I guess my question is, can you color a little bit what the difference between Erdogan just beating his chest and him actually doing something, saying something and then following through on it?
Sure. It was Erdogan that launched the Azerbaijani war against Armenia in the fall of 2020. It was on it was a Turkish call. It was Turkish weapons. It was Turkish officers, Turkish intelligence, all throughout. The Azeris, implemented part of the war, but it was a Turkish war. It was a continuation of not just the past decade or 100 years. It's a continuation of the past 1,000 years of Turks encroaching upon Armenian land, killing Armenians, emptying our homeland, erasing our memory upon those territories. It's a consistent pattern. The entirety of Western Armenia was emptied during the Armenian genocide. Nakhchivan was a portion of Armenia handed over to Azerbaijan just a year and a half ago or so. They took 70% of Artsakh. So this is, if you look at the map, if you look at a timeline of history, it's just, Turkish forces just erasing Armenia from that part of the world, with every year seeing less and less of Armenia, and less, frankly, Armenians. We're a nation of 5,000 to 6,000 years that is still less than 10 million people because we're regularly slaughtered by the Turks. So that's the context of that. The Turks are smart and they're good diplomats. So they'll present the game of, we want a stable equilibrium with the Armenians. If only they would just give us a little bit more land, or retreat from this, or not talk about the genocide, or make these concessions, then we can have peace. But it's been the history of the past, at least 800-900 years, where Turkey's just encroached, and that's what we saw this last war in 2020. One of the things that tipped the scales were Turkish drones. the Bayraktar drones, which were cobbled together with parts from all over the world, including about 10 parts sourced out of the US, were a big part of the Azerbaijani offensive. They inflicted a huge number of casualties. More than 6,000 Armenian young men were killed, many of them by drones. Now Turkey is trying to leverage this advantage by saying that Armenia must forfeit any claim to Artsakh, which has been Armenian for as long as there have been Armenians, and must accept the Turkish border, which was created by genocide, and then never speak of the genocide again. That's how they want to leverage their military defeat. By the way, the defeat was something like a NATO army with like fourth generation weaponry, with an ally of another 10 million people in Azerbaijan, against about 2.5 million Armenians in Armenia, and it was more a slaughter than a war, and that's the situation we find ourselves in. And I'll just skip back 1 second to the point Endy made. Let me say this: if 20 or 30 years ago, on paper, Turkey and Greece were both in NATO, DC would, if to the extent that DC was a decider, it would tilt toward Turkey. Today, that's not the case at all. And in fact, if you were to poll the NATO members and say, like, is Turkey really a member of NATO anymore? Nobody except Turkey. Even Turkey would vote no. Like, no one thinks Turkey is really a member of NATO. So push comes to shove, I think people will look beyond the signature on some old piece of paper, and they will look and say, where do we stand with today's Greece and today's Turkey? And I think that, as Endy said, there's not just within NATO, but within Egypt and many other countries, and France, things have shifted considerably toward Greece's direction, precisely because they're good citizens of the region, and they've gone against Turkey because they're just so reckless and irresponsible.
I mean, that what you're just talking about probably just struck a chord with anybody watching this of the Hellenic world generally, because we've heard promises like that from Turkey, and I really do have to stress, it's not just the Erdogan government. Allegedly, when Turkey invaded half of Cyprus, that was a peacekeeping mission. They're still there. They're not going anywhere. And that border rivals the Korean DMZ in terms of the most heavily armed area on earth. And this is coming at a time when, it's 100 years ago this year of the catastrophe of Asia Minor. And what you're talking about, thousands of years of Armenians in Artsakh, the same amount of time, the Greeks in Asia Minor and Smyrna and Troy and all of these fantastic Halikarnassus, and then you get like the Turkish tours of these places, and you wonder why that is. So it's because of promises like that, that were hollow.
And I think that I'm going to probably overstate my case here, but I really think sometimes that we play different games. Our game might be something like, how can we find peace? What do we need to do? What can we sacrifice? What we can concede in order to find, as I said, a stable equilibrium? That's, I think, a very Western idea. It's a very civilized idea. It doesn't work when the other side of the table is playing, I want to get rid of you. I want to destroy you. Because you literally, by the terms of the game, make it impossible for the more civilized party to win that game. So that and Turkey's played that game very well. Present yourself as, using the Western language, and then use just brutal tactics, and then create realities. And Cyprus is a perfect example. I remember this is talking to a guy at the Pentagon many years ago about something about Armenia, and he was all bent out of shape because Armenians were nervous about Turkey attacking. As it turns out, Turkey did attack. It took 10 years or so, but they did attack. And he said, no rational person in Turkey would attack. I'm like, who was rational in Turkey in 1974? Tell me about that. And by the way, it's awful easy for you. You have the luxury of sitting here in Virginia talking about how that could never happen when it's not going to be your family that pays the price. So yeah, I think that understanding Turkey from Washington is hard, and we're here to help.
I think that in America's public schools, among other institutions, it'd be a very good investment to invest in the history departments, just for the greater good. Yeah. So I just want to kind of conclude with you guys. We've talked about the frigates, we've talked about the F-16s, we've talked about your joint organizational success, marshaling bipartisan members and Congress and getting them on the same page at a time when that's very difficult. You say that out loud and it doesn't quite register in reality given the political climate. What's next? What are some of projects that you can get into? What are some things that you'd like the administration to be doing that they're not? What is Armenia doing? What is Greece doing or not doing that you would like to see? Because at the end of the day, as you just touched on, Aram, this isn't a discussion about Turkey bashing. This is wanting to correct some wrongs in a region that has been volatile for a long time, and people just want to be able to live in peace. Want to have a guarantee that when they leave their house, that they will have a reasonable chance of returning there in one piece, putting food on the table, and just going about their lives. So I guess, Aram, we can start with you, and then we can finish with Endy.
Oh, I can tell you whatever we'll do, it will be, as you mentioned, in a very bipartisan fashion. I think that our communities have sent a very healthy signal to both parties, the Democrats and Republicans, which is we're happy to work, we're eager to work. We can find common ground with almost any legislator on Capitol Hill, but that ultimately our issues are our issues, and we're not outsourcing the views or the values of Greek or Armenian Americans to anybody. These are the things that we care about, and we're citizens as much as anybody else. There's no hierarchy of citizenship based on who came on the Mayflower and who didn't. That's nonsense. So I think that's one really, really important message we sent, which is that we have the integrity of our issues. We advance things that our community care about. We're happy to engage with anybody, but in a very independent, in a very bipartisan, sometimes even a nonpartisan way. That's a really, really important part of our work.
Thank you.
To go back to our theme of coalition building and keep this very much the 30,000-foot view, because I can talk about a lot of issues, and they're all going to be on the front burner for the foreseeable future. But one of the reasons I think Greece has gotten ahead and Turkey has fallen behind is Turkey, very much like Russia right now, plays an old power politics game. This is my sphere of influence. There's no cooperation. You are with me or you are under me. Whereas Greece went from almost international pariah. If you think in 2015, at the height of the migration crisis, Greece's neighbors cut off their borders to Greece. The Visegrad countries got together and were deciding immigration issues that were determinative for Greece, almost existential for Greece. At the same time, Greece's European allies were deciding the economic future of Greece. But Greece has almost completely flipped the narrative and said, we're going to be part of a new regional and maybe European, Eastern Mediterranean order. I mean, Greece is actually in the midst of several regional power shifts in Southeast Europe, in the Eastern Mediterranean, in the greater Middle East, in part in the Caucasus. And this is the opportunity. We have very often talked about, we really didn't touch on the details of energy, but when we talk about East Mediterranean energy, Foreign Minister of Cyprus, Kassoulidis, was back in Washington last week. He restated something that he said 8 years ago, that the East Med natural gas can be like the coal and steel of the early European Union. And it's not, the European Union wasn't built by coal and steel, but coal and steel gave the EU a way to create a legal framework, a cooperative framework. That's what's happening in the East Med. And that is where Turkey has to be brought along. Turkey can be part of this. Greece and Cyprus, Egypt, everybody is told, Israel has told Turkey there's a place at the table for them. Armenia never said, we don't want peace with Turkey. Actually, Armenia has been suing for peace for decades, right? But Turkey wants to have pieces. Turkey want to have peace on its terms. They don't see a win-win game. They see a zero-sum game. So if Turkey wants to be part of this new European steel and coal community, the Eastern Mediterranean version of it, Turkey must play the role of 1950s Germany and not World War II Germany. And one thing that I especially want to stress to your viewers and your readers, and something that our coalition stresses all the time. There will be a day after Erdogan. There will be a day after Erdogan. Turkey's not going away geographically, geopolitically, power. And Armenia, Greece, Cyprus, Israel, the US are always going to have to live with Turkey. So we should be following internal politics in Turkey and values. And there are people who are natural allies that are getting hammered. And as much as we talk about F-16s, we should be talking about the fate of Osman Kavala. As much as we talk about pipelines, we should be talking about the fate of the HDP, because when that day after Erdogan comes, it's going to be a coalition in Turkey. There is no one force that's getting 50% plus one in Turkey. And if in that coalition, the most democratic reformers are shut out and the Kurds are shut out, there is no way the day after Erdogan is better than Erdogan himself. So we should be speaking up for human rights. We should be speaking up not only for the ecumenical patriarch, but the Armenian patriarch, who the fate of the Armenian patriarch and Armenian Christians in Turkey should be very instructive for us, because Turkey has already chosen on that front, and that gives us an idea of what they may do when it comes to the successor of ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew. So we should be speaking up for all these things, and not narrowly defining what is in the national interest of Greece.
Endy, that's a great point. I think it's obviously our discussion today was centered around the work of the Armenian National Committee of America and the Hellenic American Leadership Council. But it's very important for people to understand that all the arm buildup, all the infrastructure upgrades, all the political and geopolitical games that people above our pay grade make. It doesn't matter if you don't invest in people. The people are there on the ground. I'm in New York, in Chicago, Aram's in DC. That's all well and good. But what's the young person in Turkey that's going to come of age when that day of Erdogan leaving comes? What kind of choices are they going to make? So it's very important it's very easy to direct rage or disappointment or anything like that, but have hope in the youth and people that are there that want peace. And you just got to find them and support them, like Endy just said. So that's a very good point. With that, I would just like to say thank you so much to Aram Hamparian, to Endy Zemenides, the executive directors, respectively, of the Armenian National Committee of America and the executive director of the Hellenic American Leadership Council. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being the guests to reintroduce the National Herald discussions. I've spoke a little bit about this with Endy. I would very much like to have you both again on a more regular basis, so we can, like Endy said, there's so much that we can talk about at length, but this is just a one taste of what we can touch upon. There's so much energy, domestic politics, all of it that we can get into, and I'm sure our readers will be so grateful for your expertise. So gentlemen, thank you for your time, and we'll see you again soon.
Look forward to being on regularly with you, Eraklis.
Thank you.
Thank you, and have a good day, and have a good legislative session. Thank you.
Thank you.